My name is Susan Saffron. For those of you who may not know me, I'm the chairman of the Board of Trustees, or chairwoman, I guess, currently. And because of that position, I get to chair the search committee for the chancellor, the next chancellor at UNCG. We're having our first meeting today, and we're interviewing search firms and getting this part, which is our charge from President Ross from the UNC system about going out and conducting this search. So without further ado, I will present Tom Ross, president of the UNC system.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let me begin by thanking each of you for serving on the search committee. And further, let me say this is not the normal way I charge search committees. This feels a little top-down, maybe, I don't know. But I think it's important to remember that this is your search. And what I have to say to you today is an effort to try to put some parameters around the search in terms of what's legally required of you, but also to give some advice to you about how you might conduct the search. And then also I'd like to share with you my thoughts about the kind of person you should be looking for to fill the role as chancellor of UNC Greensboro, because it is it's a very important time in the history of the university, and I think the selection of the right person as chancellor is really critical for the future of the institution. So again, I thank you for your service. I don't believe there's anything any of you will do for UNC Greensboro that is more important than serving on this committee and selecting the right person to lead the institution. Let me say that you will be guided by a number of laws, code provisions, policies, and so forth. We have Ann Lemon from our staff at General Administration, who has been through, I think, 23 or 4 of these searches and understands those parameters and restrictions pretty well. And so when you have questions, feel free to ask her. You'll also have support here on campus, and they can help you. A couple of provisions that you should be particularly aware of are open meetings laws and the need to comply with open meetings laws. There will be some times during your search where you'll be in confidential sessions, closed sessions, and you must enter into those and come out of those in appropriate ways according to the law. And you're also governed by the Public Records Act, and it's important to remember that. And finally, as I indicate, by our code, the university code, which puts certain parameters around the search. As you sit here today, you don't look as large as you really are in this giant auditorium, but it is a large search committee, and that's important. It's good that it's a large search committee, because I think if you look around you, you will see that it's broadly representative of the campus and of the community and of the various constituency groups that are part of the university family. I think there are members from the student body, from the faculty, from the staff, members of the boards of trustees, alumni, and again, from the broader community and region. And all of those are important constituents for this university and have an important say in the outcome of this search. And so you're here in part to represent those different views, but I don't want you to think of yourself as just representing a particular constituency, because you're really here to represent the university and to try to find the best person for chancellor, not just to represent a particular perspective, although obviously you bring that perspective to the table. As I indicated, some of your process will be in confidence and other parts of it will be open to the public. It's important that the integrity of the process be maintained, and I suspect if you haven't already, you'll be asked to sign confidentiality statements to keep confidential what is confidential, and you're free to obviously disclose what's not confidential. It's been my advice that you allow your chair, search committee chair, to be the spokesperson of the committee. it works well because you don't get mixed messages and there's less likelihood of leaks and all that sort of thing if you speak through one voice. And that doesn't mean there has to be unanimity about what needs to be said, but you can talk about that, what needs to be said, and then allow her to be your spokesperson. I think that will work well for you. It's important that you keep records during the search, minutes of your meetings, of course, but it's also important to keep records of the cost of the search, of transportation issues, of expense issues for those of you that might be coming from out of town, all of that. It's very important that you keep good records for the university and for your own benefit. It is, I suspect, I know, going to be your decision to hire an executive search consultant. I think maybe you've already started that process earlier today, and you've received proposals from a number of qualified firms, and I think you need to interview them and ask them questions about how they would go about representing you, what efforts they would make to advertise, how would they go about identifying potential candidates, how would they go about the process of developing background information of those candidates, how would they be involved, in their minds at least, in the process of narrowing down the group of candidates. All those are questions you would want to ask them so that you're sure you're comfortable with the search firm. As a general rule, they, the groups that I think you're representing have experience in higher education, but they also have experience beyond higher education, and I think that's of value for a number of reasons. They're also used to the business of advertising and seeking candidates in a variety of different ways, but that shouldn't be all you do. All of you, as they say, know people, and many of you know people in the academic world, and so asking them to think about strong candidates, or if you know people yourself that you think would be strong candidates, I urge you to get their name to the search firm or to Ann or to other staff so that they can be included in the search as well. I think the broader the pool, the better your outcome will be because you'll have more people to compare and be able to figure out who is going to be the strongest for the university. The budget of the search is one you should pay some attention to because UNCG has to pay the bills. I think it's important for you to understand that the resources that are needed for the search need to be found. You need to have the resources available to do as comprehensive and thorough a search as possible. By the same token, we ask you to be careful with limited resources and to spend them only wisely, as I know you will, and again, to keep good records. Committees of any type never think exactly the same. And I think it's important to express yourselves and to have your views heard. But in the ideal world, you'll work together and express your views and talk about things and build a consensus about where you're heading and how you're going to do things and what the outcome is going to be. I think it'll be better for you and for the university, so I urge you to think about that. One of the first steps you'll take after hiring your search firm will be to work with them to develop a leadership profile. And some people take that as, well, we just write down chancellor, right? They're going to be chancellor. We don't need to put much more in there. But I think this is a really important opportunity for you to have input into the kind of person that you're seeking and what you believe is important in terms of characteristics and skills and background of the kind of person that you believe UNCG needs. Because people read those leadership profiles when they're looking at these jobs, and they're trying to do the same thing you're trying to do, which is to find the right fit for the institution. And so at least from my own personal experience and from talking to other people, when you read that, what you're looking for is to get a sense of who is the UNCG family. What is UNCG's vision for itself? What kind of culture is there on the campus? What kind of place would I be coming into? And I think that is reflected in that profile. And so you should take time to be sure it's really an accurate profile of UNCG. You know, some people may read it and say, that's not for me. And that's okay, because again, you're looking for the right fit. And if somebody doesn't believe they're the right fit, they probably aren't. And you probably want to look elsewhere. But a lot of people will learn a lot about the institution and about the opportunity from that profile. So I urge you to take some time to really develop a strong and clear leadership profile. I would also urge that you figure out as many different ways as you can to reach out to the campus community and beyond so that people have a chance to be heard. You can do that in a number of different ways. Probably the most frequently used is public forum, where you would have open public forums at which you would be present to hear and learn from different constituencies what it is they think the institution should look for in the next chancellor. And so I urge you to conduct those public forums for the major constituencies that are involved at UNCG. You may also want to consider surveys. They're used at times, particularly to reach out beyond the campus, but even within the campus. So among the alumni body or others like that could be asked their views about particular characteristics or skills that they think are needed at the appropriate, at this particular moment in the individual. So seeking that kind of input, I think, is really, really important. So as I say, the advertising of the position and the reaching out for candidates I've talked about, but that'll be an important part of the process as well. So, you know, while that's going on, is a great time for you to spend time gathering information about what people on the campus believe are the right kinds of people to seek. So once you've gotten to the point where you have developed your leadership profile, you've advertised, you've sought as many different avenues as possible to get candidates into the pool, then the process will start of narrowing down that pool to the ultimate place where you will end up, which is with 3 names to be submitted to the president. How you get from narrowing down the pool to 3 is a decision you make. It's your search, and so you will consider what the best way to do that is. You'll, I hope, listen to the advice of the search firm you select. You'll listen to Ann's advice, and you'll listen to your own thoughts and ideas from among the committee members about the best way to do it. The typical process is to narrow the pool down to some number, 10, 12, 15, something like that, that you then conduct what we would call airport interviews. And you know, those will occur usually off-site. And again, in the typical search is because at that point you're still trying to maintain the confidence of the individuals involved. You go through that process and then gather the information from those interviews and then narrow that down from, say, 10 where you start down to some other number, maybe down to 5 or something of that sort. And then you're going to want to conduct a second series of interviews probably. And again, that could be done in a variety of different ways. In a completely confidential search, you would again set up a place where it would be confidential and you would conduct those interviews. And if it were a completely open public search, then you might do it in a different way. That's a decision I'll come back to in a minute, but one that you will make. Once you've gotten it down to that number and you do a second set of interviews and get whatever other input you're going to get about those individuals, then you will narrow the list to 3. And that's what will be submitted back to, through the Board of Trustees back then to the President. Let me talk for a minute about the process of whether it should be in what is called a confidential or closed search, or whether it should be an open search, and sort of where that, and some of you have heard me talk about this already, but it's really not an either or, it's a continuum. I suppose, though I've never seen this happen, if you had a completely open search, you would post all the applications online, and every interview you had would be open to the public, and that sort of thing. It's not a workable approach in my view. So that's sort of one extreme. At the other extreme is, and I won't call it an extreme, but at the other end is a confidential search where you do all of the interviews and you make all of the decisions internally after having received input from the various constituencies and forums and surveys and so forth. In between there is room for different approaches. And there have been campuses that have used what we would call, for lack of a better name, a hybrid approach, which is to maintain the confidential nature of the search up until a particular point, perhaps maybe when you got it down to 4 or 5, and then to include other people in the opportunity to meet and talk with those candidates. When I say include other people, it doesn't necessarily mean opening it up to a public forum with those candidates, but it could mean including a significant number of other people, faculty, staff, others on campus with an opportunity to meet the people. Now again, if you were going to go down that road, I would urge you to get those people to sign a confidentiality agreement so that you can maintain the confidence of those individuals. But it does give broader exposure to more people, of the candidates to more people, and gives you an opportunity to get more input from the different constituency groups. The other option, of course, is to have what would be most people's minds an open search, which was to narrow it down probably to 3, although you could do it with more than that, and have a public opportunity for people to come and talk to the candidates, hear presentations, that sort of thing. So the decision's yours. I think you should balance the strengths and weaknesses of those approaches. And obviously the strength of the more open the search, the more inclusive, the more transparent, the more people that are involved. The more confidential it is, the more likely you are to get the richest pool possible. Because there are people who, if they think their names are going to be made public, at any point, they won't get into it. There are others who don't want their name public unless they're getting right down to the end. And that's a balance. You may have some people that won't come into the search if you do it in a more open fashion. So I think that's a risk and a balance that you have to consider in making the decision. I think it is important to be sure that you attract the broadest and best pool. I also think it's important that you have as good an opportunity as possible to be inclusive and to have other voices heard so that you have the best input possible and can then make the best decision moving forward. As I indicated, when you get to the end and you select 3 people, those 3 individuals' names find their way to our office. We then go through additional interviews with, I interview all the candidates, my senior team interviews the candidates. We do even more extensive background checking and reference checking than may have already been done by the search firm. And we then come up with a recommendation that we take to the Board of Governors, and the Board of Governors has the final authority and say-so, and they're the ones that elect the individual. When you submit 3 names, I would urge you to be certain that those 3 names are all people you feel comfortable can lead this institution, because you want to feel good about where things are going. It's not to say that we wouldn't talk to you and hear from you about what your thoughts are, but we ask you to present us 3 names in an unranked order for our consideration at that point in the process. So let me move, if I might, to what I think are some of the important characteristics that you should be looking for in the next chancellor. And as I describe these, I think it will become clear to you that it will be impossible to find one human being with all of these characteristics, although I hope you will. because that's probably what's required of all chancellors is what I'm about to go through. But I think I'm going to talk about these, and some of them I'm going to tell you I think are sort of non-negotiable, and others I may not mention as necessarily non-negotiable. And there are really only a couple to me that are just non-negotiable. And certainly the first one is that you find a leader with unwavering integrity. You can't be an effective leader unless you lead with integrity. And that includes for me the courage to do what's right, even when you're subject to criticism, because in a university setting, every decision you make will be criticized. And you get used to that over time, but I think it's important to have the courage to make the right decision. Because when you make the right decision, even if there's some criticism, it'll fade away. And people will see that you've done the right thing. It is important to find someone with a deep commitment to the value and importance of higher education. And I'm going to come back to the question of whether it should be an academic or a non-academic, or how you should think about that. I will say to you, there are a lot of people in the world that didn't come through the normal higher education world that care deeply about higher education and understand its value to our society and to our economy and to our communities. And so, but I think you want to find somebody who has that commitment, because it requires that deep commitment if you're going to be successful at the job. I think it also takes someone who has a really good grasp and understanding of the value of the liberal arts. In every educational institution that I think is educating people to be prepared for tomorrow, they're doing a good job in the liberal arts, because that is what provides people with the breadth of educational opportunity and the ability to think in an interdisciplinary way, and the ability to write and to think critically and to solve problems and work with other people, and all those kinds of things that are really important to be successful. And so I think somebody needs to understand that if they're going to be successful as a chancellor. In my view, Chancellor Brady has done some really good things for this institution and has had a number of successes. And I think the people that came before her, I worked closely with Pat Sullivan because I was the board chair of the board when she was chancellor, and I knew Bill Moran. I grew up in this town, so I've known most of the chancellors that were here, at least while I've been alive. And all of them have added to the legacy and strength of this institution. And we need somebody who can understand that history and that tradition and the strengths of the institution, but who can also build on them, and who can make the institution even stronger and move it to even a higher level. We need somebody who understands the mission of this institution and is comfortable with that mission. I think the institution has a role to play in our system. And it's a very important role. And what I don't think we need is a chancellor who comes in without an understanding of what that role is, that wants to take the institution in a completely different, to a completely different mission. So understanding that teaching is paramount, that research is important, that research particularly is important as opportunities for learning for undergraduates and for graduate students, and that this is not a highest level research institution, but it is a research institution that has a responsibility to its graduate students to give those opportunities. But also, I think we all know in today's world, research is increasingly critical to the undergraduate education. So those experiences, I think a person needs to know that blend. And then the third leg of the stool of the university's mission is service. And a person coming here needs to understand that. That's been a rich history of UNCG particularly, and I think someone coming needs to know that. There has been, this was not at its peak when I was on the board here, but it has gotten much, much better, and that is the cooperation and the collaboration between UNCG and A&T. And that's really important to me. It's important to our Board of Governors, and it's important to the state that those two great institutions be able to work together There's a lot of things you're already doing that you probably don't even know about that are working together that, have enhanced efficiency. But I think it is, I tell people all the time, I'm proud of you for sharing football coaches with A&T. I think that's a good decision you've made. But, I think you do need to think constantly, are there ways we can collaborate? Are there ways we can be more efficient and better at what we do and reduce costs for our students? And I think people expect that, and we need a chancellor who has that mindset. I think that you need a chancellor who understands and appreciates the value of intercollegiate athletics and what it can bring to an institution, but at the same time understands the balance that those programs have to have with academics, and with the academic investments of the university. So, it's important that academics be the first priority, absolutely, and that can't be compromised. But athletics does play an important role. There are people who come to college expecting that as part of their college experience. There are people who support the institution and stay connected to it because of athletics. So it has a role to play, but understanding the balance and the challenges of intercollegiate athletics is something that the new chancellor needs. You need someone who I think can relate well to students and who enjoys interacting with them. When I walk around our campuses, one of the things I watch with our chancellors is the reaction between students and chancellors. And if you see students come up to them, and talk to them, or say hello and know them by name, it shows that there is that connection. Students are at the core of what we do. That's why we're here. And so being able to relate to them and interact with students is really important. And that may be one of those non-negotiables as far as I'm concerned, because we have to put the students at the center, and I think that that is one way we do it. It is of utmost importance in today's world that we maintain quality. There are a lot of stresses on that right now, but I think there are ways, even with the restraints that we've had in our budget, and even with our goal of keeping tuition low and complying with our Constitution, that we can maintain excellence. Sometimes it will require innovation and new ideas and creativity, but it has to be our polar star. We have to always be thinking about the excellence of our institutions, and that's certainly true here. I like to say we've been in this, sort of malaise of the economy and budget cut era for a long time, and I think it has created morale issues and all sorts of concerns. I worry that sometimes it squelches people's ability to see beyond the current day, the current budget status that we've been living in, and to really see what the future is going to look like. And we need to try to find a chancellor who can see beyond the short-term budget situation and who can really understand what we're going to have to do in order to be both more efficient but more effective in the way that we deliver education. So there are a lot of unanswered questions that we all have about that future, but somebody who's willing to think about it and try to vision the right future is going to be important. It is, at its core, any university is really its faculty. That is the strength of any institution. And a chancellor has to understand that and has to value and support and stand with the faculty in every way possible. Because if we don't maintain the strength of our faculty, we can't deliver the excellence that I was talking about earlier. By the same token, a chancellor has to understand no institution can operate without an effective staff. And frankly, staff play a major role in the educational process as well. I tell people all the time, I can give you a bunch of stories, I won't take your time today, but of situations in which staff have interacted with students, and the student will later tell you, that changed my life. So it doesn't all happen in the classroom. There's a lot that happens outside of the classroom. And so, again, I hope that whoever you find will understand the value of faculty and staff and the critical role they play in the lives of our students, and value that and support it. You know, because we have a more constrained fiscal environment, not just in the university and not just in the state, but in the country and the world, we are going to have to depend increasingly in public universities on private dollars. So it's going to be really important to find somebody who can raise money. You know, our public institutions have not historically been very good at raising money for a number of reasons, in my view. One of the reasons is they're not in the habit of doing it. They haven't really figured out how to do it sometimes, but often their alumni and their supporters have reacted by saying, well, I gave when I paid my taxes, I don't have to give anymore. And that world's changed. You know, we're not getting you know, all the money we need from the tax revenues that are paid, and we have to create that margin of excellence by private fundraising. So finding somebody who is really a proven fundraiser, I think, is going to be important. So I hope you understand by listening to some of that the role of a chancellor today is very challenging, and it's varied. It's not just understanding the academic side of an institution. It's not just being a good operational manager. It's not just being a good fundraiser. It's not being a good face for the institution. And it's all of those things and much more. They are challenging jobs, and if you doubt that, all you have to do is look at the data about how long they stick around. And you know, it's going downhill because it's a really hard job, and I think people you know, they burn out. So it's really going to be important to find somebody with that passion for higher education, that, you know, they're in it because they got that passion. That's what will drive them. And as I said, that doesn't mean it needs to be somebody it doesn't have to be somebody who's come up through the academic ranks. In my view, there are a number of really talented leaders that understand the value of higher education. They won't come with as much experience in some areas as somebody who comes through an academic track, but they can bring you a lot of those leadership talents and skills that you need in today's world to be an effective leader of any institution, but particularly an institution of higher learning. It needs to be somebody who's comfortable in a public environment too, and so I'll say this about people, whether they're coming from academics or they're coming from the outside. You know, it's a different world to lead a public institution than it is a private one. I have that experience. I can tell you there's a big difference. And part of it is the public scrutiny and accountability and all the public records and open meetings and things I just told you about earlier. So those are additional pressures that you need to be sure you find somebody who can live in that environment because it does add a layer of complexity to the work. I hope you will keep an open mind about the kind of candidate that might be successful here. I don't think there's a right profile that you'll just all of a sudden see on a resume. So, this is it. They got the right resume. This is the right person. But instead, it's a mixture of experiences, of understanding different aspects of the job, of personality, of all those different things that are going to matter. And so all I ask of you is to keep an open mind and to look at all sorts of candidates that are brought to you and find the best leader for the institution. It is a tall order. The characteristics I've laid out for you and those that you'll add to it, it's a tall order, but I'm confident we'll attract a lot of very good candidates to this institution. As I said when I spoke with the faculty a week or so ago, or however long ago it's been, probably 2 weeks now, I said to them that, you know, despite everything that's going on in the world, the University of North Carolina system is still recognized as, if not the best, one of the top 1 or 2 or 3 best public universities in this country, which makes it one of the top 1 or 2 or 3 public universities in the world. And UNCG is an important part of this institution, of our system. It has been, you know, actually from the day the system was created, when it was originally created with 3 campuses, UNCG was one of those 3. So this is a great place in a great community with great potential. and it will attract great candidates. And your job, the most difficult part of your job is going to be honing it down from a lot of great people down to the 3 that you think are the best fit for UNCG. Let me just say, timeline-wise, you know, our goal would be to have somebody in place this summer. You know, we always love to get them on campus and get them indoctrinated a little bit in terms of what's happening day to day and what the school year is going to look like and all that before the students show up, because it changes quickly when that happens. So we want to get somebody by the summer if possible. I don't think that'll be a problem. But by the same token, what's most important is to get the right person, however long it takes. And that has to be paramount. You have to find the right person. So timeline-wise, again, we hope we can bring it to conclusion by sometime this summer, but what I really challenge you to do is find the right person. And the last thing I would say to you is that when you finish your work and have found 3 people, and the Board of Governors has made a decision and elected a particular person as the chancellor, you're not done. Part of your job, as far as I'm concerned, is to welcome and support the chancellor, and to be sure that that person knows that you were with them in the search committee and you're with them now and you're going to support them and help them and you know, introduce them to people and speak positively about them so they can get off to a strong start, because that's really important at any new job, and particularly one when you're leading an institution. So again, I thank you very much for your service, for your commitment to UNCG and to our university, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about the process or about the kind of person, about anything that you want to ask me. But you've already signed up, so you can't back out.